Look, we are right in the middle of a massive structural shift in how businesses actually have to prove their value. For the longest time, keeping the details of a deal just a little bit foggy was a highly profitable way to operate. But that window, it is slamming shut. In this breakdown, we're going to look at exactly how the market is permanently shifting and why business models that rely on buyer confusion are becoming completely obsolete. Think about this for a second. There are industries where price opacity isn't a flaw, it's the business model. Just remember the last time you got a quote that was totally full of moving targets, surprise fees, and super vague deliverables. That isn't just poor communication on their part. For a lot of operators out there, it's a deliberate strategic shield. It makes it remarkably easy to extract profit without actually proving any real value. And honestly, most importantly, it lets the provider blame the customer when reality inevitably falls short. Now, let's be really clear about something. We aren't saying that every complex quote is deceptive. There's actually a massive difference between legitimate complexity and deliberate opacity. Legitimate complexity is kind of like building a custom home. It genuinely requires specific calculations, unique engineering, and a bespoke structure. Deliberate opacity, on the other hand, is a strategic choice completely designed to keep you in the dark. It literally uses your confusion as a protective moat. So, what is blowing up this outdated model? Artificial intelligence. But we need to look at AI in a very specific way here. In this context, AI is acting as an automation front end. For decades, the seller held this massive information advantage simply because it took the buyer way too much time and energy to figure out if a quote was actually fair. Well, AI is stepping in right now and effectively vaporizing that asymmetry. It takes that exhausting, weeks-long process of doing your homework and compresses it into literally seconds. A buyer can now just instantly spin up alternatives, map out typical price ranges, and see exactly what a standard scope of work should actually look like. But here's the truly dangerous part for those opaque businesses. AI feeds the buyer the exact red flags they need to watch out for. It reduces the friction of research so drastically that the old trick of just keeping the buyer confused simply stops working. And that leads us to a really harsh truth for some of these operators. Ignorance is no longer margin. Because buyers can now instantly generate vastly better questions. Vendors can't rely on buyer confusion as a defensible mode anymore. I mean, if your entire pricing power relies on the customer not knowing what questions to ask, AI just gave them the cheat code. The buyer's armed, they're aware, and they are basically impossible to keep in the dark. But that's just the front end. While AI is arming the buyer, there's an equally powerful standard arriving on the back end to squeeze the seller. Think of it as the accountability hammer, or the -1 standard. It dictates a very simple rule. If the promised value goes missing, the price goes negative, and the provider pays the penalty. It's a fundamental and honestly kind of violent shift in how risk is handled in a transaction. Let's put these two worlds side by side. The old price fog model absolutely depends on ambiguity, right? It thrives on unclear scopes and dodging responsibility. You simply cannot run a hidden pricing model if you're forced to be specific. It's like trying to hide a magic trick while someone is shining a massive spotlight on you. The -1 standard demands defined outcomes, hard proof, and real financial penalties when that value isn't delivered. It basically makes opacity suicidal. So when you smash these two dynamics together, what do you get? We call it the dual transparency squeeze. We're looking at a continuous, inescapable pressure cooker here. On one side, AI is squeezing from the buyer's perspective, forcing clarity by making research instant. And on the other side, that -1 standard is squeezing from the seller's perspective, demanding financial consequences for failure. The price fog is trapped right in the middle, just getting completely crushed from both sides. Let's actually trace how this continuous squeeze plays out in the real world. It all kicks off with that AI comparison. Because the friction of research has been completely eliminated, the immediate, unavoidable result is that buyers ask way better questions. The buyer doesn't even need to be an industry genius. They just know enough now to interrogate the offer. They ask, what exactly is included here? What should I be comparing this to? And just from those questions alone, the fog starts to lift. And because they're asking those smart questions, they literally back the seller into a corner. The vendor can't just hide behind corporate speak or vague jargon anymore. They are forced to provide defined outcomes and actual proof. As the buyer becomes harder and harder to confuse, the pressure on the seller to make their offer completely legible gets intense. If they can't define what success actually looks like, well, the armed buyer simply takes their money and walks away. And this is exactly where that accountability hammer comes swinging down. Once those outcomes and proofs are clearly defined, the -1 standard steps in and attaches real, painful consequences. This is the exact moment ambiguity transforms from a simple communication issue into a massive financial liability. Because expectations are explicit, any failure is super easy to measure. Missing the value triggers a penalty, and the seller is fully on the hook. So, what is the inevitable endgame of this whole chain reaction? Opacity collapses and standards rise. When ambiguity becomes a costly liability instead of a protective asset, the entire sector gets dragged toward clarity. The strategic advantage of hiding the details of the deal completely evaporates. Pricing becomes explicit, proof becomes expected, and providers are finally held to a strictly measurable standard. Which brings us to a pretty heavy strategic question. What actually happens to your business when you can no longer rely on your customers' ignorance as your profit margin? Operators who built their whole empires on opacity are definitely going to cry foul. They'll complain that AI is ruining their margins and it's totally unfair. But it's not unfair. It's just the market finally growing up. The baseline of what buyers expect has permanently moved. It forces a complete rethink of what a competitive advantage even is. The old way, that weak moat of just hiding the deal to protect your margins, that's drying up right now. The future belongs to these strong moats. These are the businesses that can make their pricing logic, their scope, and their proof of delivery clearer than anyone else in the room. Transparency is no longer some cute marketing buzzword. It is an absolute operational requirement. There's this quote that I think perfectly nails the end point of this whole transition. It goes, "You don't gamble on us, we gamble on us. Don't pay for promises, pay for proof." The absolute most dominant providers in this new market are the ones who willingly eat the risk. They aren't hiding behind vague deliverables. They confidently state that if their value goes missing, their price goes negative. They embrace the accountability because they know for a fact their delivery is bulletproof. So, I want to leave you with this final thought as this dual squeeze keeps getting tighter. How clearly can you define your own price logic, your exact scope, and your ultimate responsibility before your buyer's AI just asks for it? Because make no mistake, the buyers are already using these tools. If your business model still depends on them not knowing any better, you are running out of time. Reevaluate your reliance on ambiguity today before the market completely forces your hand tomorrow.